Hi guys, welcome to a new video. So in this video I want to share with you my latest kit, and this is for the 1/12 scale Tabletop Apothecary Cabinet Kit. Now if you are interested in purchasing this kit for yourself, then you will find the details to my Etsy store in the description box, and yes, it does come with all of these potion bottles as well. Inside the kit you will also find a very detailed pictorial for you to follow along to, and at the bottom I've added these small little spell recipe potion cards in various sizes for you to use if you want to. You will also find these 5 wooden pieces, and these are the pieces which are going to make up our cabinet. You'll also find a craft board piece with our decorative elements for our front and our drawers, as well as some pieces so that we can hide those hinges. Talking of hinges, you will also find 2 hinges in there and 7 dressmaker's pins that we're going to use as our door handles, and then we also have the apothecary potion bottles as well. Now I spent quite a bit of time sculpting these to give us some variation in sizes and styles. We have clusters, we have singles, and we go from very large to decorate the top of our cabinet and right down to some very tiny ones which we can fit inside our shelves. There are more than you are ever going to need for this cabinet, but you can dress them around your display or even in other projects as well. I also sculpted a burnt candle for us to use, and with all of that being said, let's make this thing. So starting with our cabinet doors, we are going to take the piece marked DS and we are going to run a line of glue on the underside of this, and we are going to glue this on top of the piece marked CDB. When gluing this into place, just make sure that the engraved area is facing inwards inside the box. Next we are going to take our pieces marked DT and DB and we are going to glue these into place, and then finally we will add our 4th long piece which is marked DS. Once this is complete, we can then copy the exact same method for our second door. Your piece should now look like this. So once you've completed your 2 doors, we can move on to the main cabinet itself, and we're just going to follow that same process as we did for the doors, except this time we are going to start with the part marked T, followed by our 2 sides and then our base. Again, just make sure that the engraved mark is on the inside of the cabinet. Now I did add a score line inside the cabinet hinge alignment area, and this is just so that you can accurately place your hinges into place. For the hinges, I recommend using B7000 as your glue, and the reason for that is because if we are going to use just regular super glue, it's not going to give us that wiggle room that we are going to need for us to be able to swing those doors backwards. So when you are using the B7000, it really allows for that wiggle room. Now when your hinges have had a moment to set up, what you're going to do is place your hinge on the opposite side and just make sure that this aligns nicely. I have noticed that sometimes the pins in the barrel can protrude a little bit, so just make sure that everything lines up nice and flush. Once you are happy that everything is going to fit correctly, I would then take a small object, a pen, or in my case I'm using a little micro brush, and then go on to the inside and just place that into place so that you can burnish it down inside that little engraved area. Once that is done and it has had another moment for it to set up, we can start to manipulate it to make it sit in the correct place. So gently keep on taking it out and releasing it and pushing it backwards until it easily opens and closes in the backwards position slightly behind itself. Next we need to put our hinge covers into place, so we are going to take the pieces marked HC from our decorative element sheet of cardstock, and to glue mine into place I'm using some Aliens tacky glue. I'm gluing cardstock, glue and metal together, and this stuff, it sticks to pretty much anything. We do need to make sure that these are pressed down and burnished down really well so that these won't interfere when we put our shelves in later on down the road. Our drawers are going to be glued in the same way throughout, so start with your drawer front and rest this against something which is flat, and then taking the base of our drawer, we are going to run some glue along the long edge, and we're going to offer that up to the back of the front of the drawer. Next we are going to take our side pieces, running glue along a short and a long edge, and we will offer that up to the front piece, and then finally followed by the back piece. We're going to repeat that for both the drawers. One tip is to make sure that when you are gluing your pieces together, always glue on the flush side and not the piece where you have your release notches. For our 3 small drawers, I do recommend that you only release the pieces as you need them, because the 3 sides are very similar in size, and if we glue this incorrectly then our drawer won't be square. So we're going to follow the same process of gluing our base up to the front of our drawer front, making sure that the notch is at the back. We will then glue in our 2 sides and then finally our back piece. At this point, the build inside of it is complete, so we can start to think about how we are going to decorate it. So on your decorative element sheet, you will find these 5 pieces, and these are our drawer fronts. To glue mine into place, I'm using wood glue. Next, I'm going to decorate my door. So taking these 4 elements, I'm going to take the thin rectangular piece and I'm going to run some glue evenly around the 4 sides of that, and then I'm going to glue that on top of my Gothic arch. I do like to use a brayer on mine just so that I can make sure that everything is glued down nice, flat and even. Next, I'm going to use some Zig 2-way glue so that I can try and get an even spread of glue around my piece, and then I'm going to glue that onto the front of my cabinet doors. For my drawers, I'm going to start with the larger drawer at the bottom and then work my way up in size order. Now, one tip which I would recommend that you do for this is put your pins into place inside your drawers, and then put the glue along the 3 edges of your shelf, and then place your shelf on top of your drawer, making sure that it isn't too tight, and then very quickly release your drawer. Then once your glue has had a little bit of time to set up, you can then put up your next drawer and then repeat that process. Just make sure that you don't do it too tight so that you are able to easily remove these drawers. I rediscovered this really nice chalk paint from Folk Art in my stash when I was looking for a colour for me to paint this with, because in my first version of this I painted in more of a reddish brown, and typically I paint everything in a walnut, so I thought, oh, I'll try and go a little bit different today. However, it just looks exactly the same as when I paint everything, because dark brown is, I guess, kind of dark brown. I did think that I was going to lose the texture and the grain of the wood with this being a chalk paint, but actually everything shines through really well, so I was really happy with that. Whilst my brush is still wet, I'm going to paint my door shelves. I then gave everything a light dry brushing with a light brown colour, and then I sealed everything in with some beeswax. Inside your kit you will find 7 dressmaker's pins, and we're going to use these as our drawer pulls. For me to cut mine down, I use this really handy little tool which I purchased on Temu, and this cuts your wire or whatever it is that you are cutting completely flush so that you don't have any sharp edges. To glue mine into place, I'm using a gel super glue, and then with the help of some precision tweezers, pushing that into the pre-made holes. Now, I wasn't so perfect at cutting mine down to the correct lengths, but the chalk paint covers that without any problems at all. I'm using a brass colour nail varnish to paint my drawer pulls, and one thing for you to keep in mind when you are inserting your pins is make sure that they are inserted deep enough so that the centre drawer does not interfere with how your doors close. This kit comes with a whole bunch of potion bottles in various sizes and shapes and styles for us to play around with. For me to create the look of having some liquid or some potions inside my bottles, I'm going to use some transparent paints. I am also going to use some opaque paints as well, so that I can try and create the look of various bottles. It may be made of a glass, like a dark glass, or maybe a metal or something along those lines. Then to make everything look as though there are liquids inside the bottles, I took them outside and I sprayed them with a gloss varnish. Now you do not have to use a gloss varnish, you could use a nail gel or UV resin or anything along those lines as well. To create the labels for my bottles, I'm using an off-white colour, and I found that the best way for me to apply the paint was, instead of using a brush, was actually to use some ball styluses in various sizes. This allowed me to more easily put the labels on, because some of these bottles are very, very tiny. Off camera, I painted my candle, which also comes inside the kit, and then I'm starting to think about where I want to glue my pieces into place. Now, one thing which I would recommend is that with the smaller bottles and the door pieces, play around with your bottles first of all, and then at that point when you decide on what size you want to use, then glue in your door divider shelf, and then continue like that, and then that way you won't glue it into place and then struggle to put something the correct size on the shelf, if that makes sense. I'm not going to fill all of my shelves today, because I do want to leave some of them open so that I can add some pieces to this as time goes by, as this project which this cabinet is going into, is still very much on the make for me. So at this point, your cabinet is now complete, and I hope that you had a load of fun making that. But I am going to continue making some pieces with you today. So to start off, I'm going to make some scrolls. So I'm just using a very thin, cheap printer paper, and then I'm using some distress inks, and I'm starting off with the colour Vintage Photo, and then I'm going over that with some ground espresso. And I'm going to start off with making some paper stacks. So I cut a thin strip, and then I'm cutting them down to, I think it was 1/2 inch for my pieces of paper. And then just to give them a little bit more age, I'm giving them a little bit of a scrumple, and then I'm going to glue them up into stacks. Now, I have added these printouts inside your kit for you to have fun with. They're not in any particular scale, but I did add a few different sizes just so that if you do want to use them, then it gives you some options. Then once I had my stacks ready, I then went over with a very small blending brush just so that I could unify the edges of my little stacks, and then I glued that into place on the top of my cabinet. Next, I'm going to make a small bunch of scrolls. So to do that, I'm first of all cutting some strips of paper with what I think are called a deckled edge scissor. I then rolled everything around what was a knitting needle, and then eventually I go down to a toothpick just so I can get a nice tight roll. I do go over all of my edges again with that distress ink, and then to make sure that nothing unravels, I glue everything down into place. Next, I want to try and make a wax seal. So I'm using some red polymer clay and a super tiny little clay cutter. To make sure that it fitted my scroll properly, I glued it into place with some tacky glue, and then I baked it using my heat gun. I didn't like the colour of the clay, so to make it more wax seal, I use this Slaughter Red speed paint. For my tabletop cauldron, I mixed together some peach resin dye with some UV resin, and I built it up in layers just so that I can make sure that it was cured correctly. Then on my final layer, just adding resin alone, I used these iridescent beads which I purchased quite a while ago from Temu, just so that I could get that bubbling potion effect. Witches don't typically tend to have glass transparent cauldrons, so I did mask off the top of my cauldron and I took it outside and sprayed everything black. The owner of the Moonlit Moss is actually a very nice witch and she's a herbalist, so off camera I painted this little plant pot and saucer and filled it with some herbs. I then went through my stash and found a chopping board which I made quite some time ago and started to build a scene to make it look as though she is in the process of chopping up some herbs and making up a nice little brew. The knife was a little charm which I got from Temu and I just painted my handle with some black nail varnish. And this brings me to the end of the video. So if you would like to purchase this kit for yourself, then you will find the link to my Etsy store in the description box below. If you have enjoyed the video, please give it a little like, and if you have not subscribed, then please consider subscribing to my channel. And as always, I hope that you have had a fantastic day today, and I shall see you very soon. Bye!